The first thing he noticed every morning was not the light. It was the weight. Before his eyes opened, before the sounds of the city seeped through the thin walls of his room, something already pressed down on his chest. It had no shape, no clear name, yet it was unmistakably there, heavy, familiar, intimate in the way only long-carried burdens can be. His mind was awake before his body. Thoughts arrived in a rush, as if they had been waiting behind a door all night. Fragments of yesterday replayed themselves without invitation. Words spoken too sharply, silences that should have been filled, decisions postponed, opportunities missed. Then came tomorrow. Unfinished tasks, imagined failures, conversations that had not yet happened but already felt exhausting. He lay still, staring at the ceiling, and wondered how something so intangible could feel so real. People around him believed his life was fine. From the outside, it looked orderly enough. A job that paid the bills, a place to live, meals eaten at regular hours. Nothing was obviously broken. Yet inside, everything felt constantly on the verge of collapse. The mind never rested. Even in moments that were supposed to be peaceful, walking home at dusk, drinking tea in silence, lying down at night. His thoughts ran endlessly, like a river swollen after a storm. They did not flow gently. They crashed, collided, circled back on themselves. He could not remember the last time he had experienced true stillness, the kind that did not feel forced or fragile. Sometimes he envied objects. A chair simply existed as a chair. A tree stood without regret. A stone carried no memory of yesterday and no anxiety about tomorrow. They did not replay conversations or rehearse mistakes. They did not ask themselves who they should have been. He did, and the more he tried to fix his mind, the more tangled it became. He tried distraction first. Music played constantly, filling every quiet space. Screens glowed late into the night. Podcasts, videos, endless scrolling. Anything to avoid being alone with his thoughts. Yet the silence always returned, and when it did, it felt even louder. Then he tried control. He told himself to think positively. He made lists of things he should be grateful for. He repeated affirmations he did not believe, hoping belief would follow repetition. For brief moments, the mind obeyed, but soon enough, the old patterns resurfaced, unchanged and stubborn. The effort itself became exhausting. One evening, after another long day that felt heavier than it should have, he found himself sitting alone, staring at nothing in particular. The room was quiet. The air felt thick. His breath was shallow without him realizing it. A single thought surfaced, clearer than the rest. I need a way out. Not a solution. Not improvement. Escape. He did not want to understand his suffering anymore. He wanted distance from it. He wanted silence. Not the kind that listens, but the kind that erases. That night, he searched for answers with the same restless urgency that filled his days. Articles, videos, fragments of advice blurred together until one word appeared again and again, glowing with quiet promise. Meditation. The descriptions sounded like relief wrapped in simplicity. Empty your mind. Let go of thoughts. Find peace within. Images accompanied the words. Serene faces, closed eyes, bodies perfectly still against soft, natural backdrops. The people looked untouched by worry, unburdened by doubt. Their calm seemed effortless, almost otherworldly. Something in him leaned toward it instinctively. If there was a practice that could silence the chaos, he wanted it. If there was a technique that could lift this invisible weight, he would try it. He did not think of meditation as understanding. He thought of it as a doorway, an exit from the room he no longer wanted to be trapped in. The next morning, he sat on the edge of his bed and attempted to meditate for the first time. He straightened his back awkwardly, closed his eyes, and waited. At first, nothing happened. Then everything happened at once. Thoughts surged with renewed intensity, as if offended by being ignored. His legs felt uncomfortable. His back ached. An itch appeared on his nose, then another on his arm. Time seemed to stretch unnaturally, each minute heavier than the last. He tried to push the thoughts away. Be quiet, he commanded silently. This is meditation. You're supposed to be calm. The mind did not listen. Images, worries, and memories crowded in faster than before. His breath became shallow. Irritation rose. The very thing he had hoped meditation would erase was now magnified. After a few minutes, though it felt far longer, he opened his eyes in frustration. "This isn't working," he muttered to the empty room. Yet something curious lingered beneath the disappointment. Not relief, but a strange recognition. The chaos he had tried so hard to escape had not been created by meditation. It had already been there. Meditation had merely removed the distractions that usually kept it hidden. Over the following days, he continued to sit, driven less by hope than by desperation. Each session followed the same pattern. He would close his eyes, brace himself, and then be overwhelmed by the sheer volume of his inner world. He began to believe he was doing it wrong. Everyone else seemed to find peace in meditation. Why did it make him more restless? Why did silence feel unbearable instead of soothing? One afternoon, while walking through a small park near his home, he noticed an elderly man sitting quietly beneath a tree. The man's posture was relaxed, his eyes gently lowered. He did not look like the polished images online. There was nothing dramatic about him. And yet, something about his stillness felt different, unforced, unperformed. As the protagonist passed by, the man opened his eyes and looked at him, not sharply, not with curiosity, but with a calm familiarity that felt oddly intimate. "Your steps are heavy," the man said softly. The words stopped him. He had not realized how loudly he was walking, how tightly his body was held together. He hesitated, then asked, almost without thinking, "How did you know?" The man smiled faintly. "Because I used to walk the same way." They sat together on a nearby bench. The conversation was brief, almost ordinary. The protagonist spoke of stress, of restlessness, of trying to meditate, but feeling worse instead of better. The man listened without interruption. When the story ended, the man nodded slowly and said something that unsettled him more than any advice could have. Meditation does not calm the mind at first. It reveals it. The words lingered in the air between them. Seeing the confusion on the protagonist's face, the man continued. "If your room has been cluttered for years, opening the windows does not make it clean. It only lets in light." That evening, as the protagonist returned home, he felt no immediate relief. The weight was still there. The thoughts were still loud. Nothing had magically improved. Yet something subtle had shifted. For the first time, he considered the possibility that meditation was not failing him. Perhaps it was showing him something he had spent years avoiding. Perhaps the discomfort was not a sign of danger, but of truth. That night, when he sat again in silence, he did not try to escape. He simply noticed how much he wanted to. And for the first time, he stayed long enough to see it clearly. At first, he believed silence was something to be achieved. A destination, a state, a reward waiting patiently at the end of enough effort. This belief shaped the way he approached meditation in the days that followed. Each time he sat down, he carried an unspoken expectation with him. This time, it will work. This time, the noise would finally fade. This time, the weight would lift. He did not realize that this expectation itself was already noise. He chose a corner of his room where the light was softest. He placed a cushion on the floor, straightened his back, and closed his eyes with careful determination. He tried to imitate the images he had seen, the stillness, the calm, the quiet dignity of those who seemed untouched by inner storms. "Focus on the breath," he whispered to himself, recalling a line he had read somewhere. So he did. At least he tried to. The breath felt strange when observed too closely. Too shallow, too uneven. He began adjusting it unconsciously, inhaling deeper, exhaling longer, trying to shape it into something peaceful. The moment he noticed he was controlling it, frustration surfaced. "Just breathe," he scolded himself. "Why is this so difficult?" Thoughts flooded in again, louder now because they were unwelcome. Lists formed. Regrets resurfaced. Imagined futures unfolded in rapid succession. Every few seconds, he realized he had been lost in thinking and snapped back to the breath with irritation. Each return felt like failure. Time dragged. His legs tingled. His shoulders tightened. He checked the clock after what felt like an eternity and discovered only 7 minutes had passed. 7 minutes. He opened his eyes abruptly, disappointment washing over him. This was not what meditation was supposed to be. In his mind, meditation had promised escape, a temporary disappearance from the relentless commentary inside his head. Instead, it felt like being locked in a room with the very thing he was trying to avoid. Over the next week, he increased his efforts. If sitting silently did not bring peace, perhaps structure would. He downloaded guided meditations, hoping a voice might lead him somewhere quieter. He followed instructions carefully, counting breaths, visualizing light, imagining calm spaces. For a while, it seemed to help. The voice spoke gently, reassuringly, creating a sense of companionship. His mind followed along, obedient and hopeful. There were moments, brief, fragile moments, when the thoughts softened, when the body relaxed slightly. But as soon as the voice faded, the silence returned with renewed intensity. And with it came disappointment. Each session ended the same way, a subtle sense of failure, as though he had missed a hidden step everyone else understood intuitively. The question began to haunt him. Why can't I do this right? The more he searched for silence, the more elusive it became. It began to feel personal. He compared himself to others. Friends who spoke casually about meditation improving their lives, articles praising its benefits, testimonials filled with words like clarity, peace, and freedom. Everyone else seemed to be finding something he could not reach. The comparison deepened his restlessness. Instead of relief, meditation became another task to perform, another standard he was failing to meet. He started each session tense, already bracing himself for disappointment. The mind sensed this pressure and resisted even more fiercely. One evening, after a particularly frustrating attempt, he stood up abruptly and paced the room. His jaw was clenched. His breath was tight. "This is pointless," he said aloud. Yet even as the words left his mouth, he felt the hollowness behind them. Giving up did not feel like relief. It felt like resignation. He knew the noise would not disappear just because he stopped sitting. That night, sleep came late. Lying in the darkness, he realized something uncomfortable. He was not actually interested in understanding his mind. He wanted it gone, silenced, replaced with something smoother, easier, less demanding. Meditation, to him, was not an act of curiosity. It was an act of avoidance. The next morning, he sat again, but with a different quality. Less hope, more weariness. As he closed his eyes, a subtle tension surfaced immediately, like a muscle that had been clenched for too long. He noticed how badly he wanted the experience to change, how quickly impatience arose when it did not. This time, instead of trying to control the breath, he simply noticed how shallow it was. He noticed the urge to fix it, the urge to improve the moment, the urge to get somewhere else. The realization surprised him. Even in meditation, he was running from discomfort, running from uncertainty, running from himself. Thoughts appeared, as they always did. But now, beneath them, he sensed something deeper, a quiet desperation, a constant reaching for something different from what was already here. He saw how the mind treated the present moment as a problem to be solved rather than a reality to be met. The silence he sought was not simply the absence of noise. It was the absence of resistance. And resistance, he was beginning to see, was everywhere. As this understanding surfaced, another wave of frustration followed. If meditation isn't escape, he wondered, then what is it? That question lingered without answer. Later that day, while walking through the same park where he had met the elderly man before, he noticed his steps again, fast, uneven, carrying urgency without destination. He slowed unconsciously, his attention drawn inward. He realized how often his body mirrored his mind, always leaning forward, always reaching, never arriving. He sat on a bench and closed his eyes briefly, not to meditate formally, but simply to pause. Sounds drifted in, the rustle of leaves, distant voices, the hum of traffic. None of it was especially pleasant or unpleasant. It was simply happening. For a fleeting moment, he did not try to escape it. The moment passed quickly, but it left a trace. That evening, when he returned to his cushion, something had shifted again. He no longer expected silence to descend like a reward. Instead, he noticed the wanting itself, the grasping for calm, the subtle belief that peace existed somewhere other than here. As he sat, thoughts arose as usual, but now, layered beneath them, was a growing awareness of the effort to push them away. The effort felt heavy. He saw clearly that every attempt to force silence created more tension. Every demand for calm strengthened the very restlessness he wished to dissolve. Meditation, he began to suspect, was not about achieving silence at all. It was about meeting noise without fear. This realization did not bring immediate comfort. In fact, it felt unsettling. If meditation was not a doorway out, then it meant staying with the mess, the uncertainty, the unfiltered truth of his inner world. Yet strangely, the idea did not repel him as much as he expected. There was a quiet honesty in it. For the first time since he had begun, he allowed himself to sit without trying to improve the experience. He did not chase silence. He did not measure progress. He simply noticed what was already present. The breath as it was, the thoughts as they came, the restlessness as it moved through the body. Nothing dramatic happened, and yet, beneath the continued noise, something subtle emerged, a thin thread of steadiness, not because the mind was quiet, but because he was no longer fighting it. That night, as he lay down to sleep, the weight was still there, but now he could feel its shape, and in feeling it clearly, he sensed, without fully understanding why, that silence was not something to be found elsewhere. It was something that revealed itself only when he stopped running. He did not plan to meet the teacher again. In truth, he was not even sure he could call the elderly man a teacher. Their first encounter had been brief, unceremonious, almost accidental. And yet, since that day, the man's words had followed him quietly, weaving themselves into the background of his thoughts. Meditation does not calm the mind at first. It reveals it. The sentence returned to him in unexpected moments, while washing dishes, while waiting at a crosswalk, while lying awake at night. It did not offer comfort. It offered clarity. And clarity, he was learning, could be unsettling. A week passed, then another. One afternoon, driven less by intention than by habit, he found himself walking through the park again. The path curved gently between trees whose leaves whispered in the breeze. Children's laughter drifted from a distant playground. The ordinary rhythm of life unfolded without urgency. And there, beneath the same tree, sat the old man. He looked unchanged. Simple clothing, relaxed posture, eyes lowered in quiet attention. It was as though he had never moved since their last meeting, as though time passed around him rather than through him. The protagonist hesitated. Part of him wanted to turn away. He was not sure what he hoped to gain. Another explanation? Another unsettling truth? He already felt exposed enough by his own practice. Yet his feet carried him forward. As he approached, the man opened his eyes and smiled gently, as if he had been expecting him. "You came back," the man said. "I didn't plan to," the protagonist replied honestly. The man nodded. Few things that matter are planned. They sat together on the grass, the silence between them unforced. Unlike the silence of his meditation sessions, this one did not feel like something to endure. It felt shared. After a moment, the protagonist spoke. Words spilled out more easily than he expected. He spoke of his attempts to meditate, of the frustration, the constant noise, the disappointment. He admitted, without embellishment, that he wanted peace but seemed to be moving further away from it. The old man listened without interruption. His attention did not waver. He did not nod excessively or offer reassurance. He simply listened. When the protagonist finished, the man asked quietly, "Why do you meditate?" The question caught him off guard. "I want silence," he answered after a pause. "I want my mind to stop." The man looked at him with gentle curiosity. "And when the mind does not stop, I feel like I'm failing." Failing at what? He hesitated. He had never examined that assumption closely. "At meditation," he said finally. The man smiled faintly. Meditation is not a performance. The words landed softly but firmly. The man picked up a fallen leaf from the ground and held it between his fingers. "Tell me," he said, "when you sit, what do you do with your thoughts?" "I try to push them away, and when they return, I try harder." The man nodded. "So your meditation is a battle." The protagonist felt exposed, as though something obvious had been named aloud for the first time. "Let me ask you something else," the man continued. "When you sit, are you trying to escape your life?" The question pierced more deeply than the others. He opened his mouth to deny it, then stopped. The truth rose uncomfortably clear. "Yes," he admitted, "I am." The man did not judge him. He did not correct him. He simply said, "Then you are using meditation the way a drowning person uses driftwood, not to understand the water, but to get away from it." The metaphor lingered. "Is that wrong?" the protagonist asked. "It is human," the man replied, "but it is not freedom." They sat in silence again. The breeze moved through the trees, lifting the edges of the man's robe slightly. The world continued, indifferent to their conversation. The man spoke once more. "Meditation is not an escape from life. It is an intimate meeting with it." The protagonist frowned. "But if meditation doesn't make the mind peaceful, what is the point?" The man placed the leaf back on the ground. "Tell me," he said, "if a pond is muddy, what happens when you stop stirring the water?" "It settles," the protagonist replied. "Does it settle because you force it to?" "No." "Does it settle because you demand clarity?" "No." "Then why do you expect your mind to be different?" The question echoed. The man continued, "When you sit, you stir the water constantly. You chase silence. You fight noise. You judge every thought. And then you wonder why nothing settles." A quiet understanding began to form. "So what should I do?" the protagonist asked. The man looked at him steadily. "Before doing, you must see." He gestured toward the path in front of them. "Walk," he said. They stood and began walking slowly. The man's steps were unhurried, almost playful in their lightness. The protagonist noticed how different this pace felt from his usual hurried stride. "Feel your feet touching the ground," the man instructed casually, as though commenting on the weather. "No need to change anything. Just notice." As they walked, the protagonist felt the subtle pressure of each step, the shifting of weight, the rhythm of movement. His thoughts did not disappear, but they softened slightly, like background noise rather than commands. "This," the man said, "is also meditation." The protagonist looked at him, surprised. "Meditation is not confined to stillness," the man continued. "It is the art of seeing clearly whatever is happening." They returned to the tree and sat again. "When you sit," the man said, "do not aim for silence. Aim for honesty." "Honesty about what?" "About your experience," the man replied. "When restlessness arises, no restlessness. When frustration arises, no frustration. Do not add a story about success or failure." He paused, then asked the question that would echo long after the conversation ended. "Are you meditating to escape or to see?" The words struck him with quiet force. He had no answer, and yet, in not answering, something shifted. The man continued gently, "Seeing is enough. You do not need to change what you see. Awareness itself is already free." The sun dipped lower in the sky. Shadows lengthened. The conversation slowed, dissolving naturally into silence. Before they parted, the man offered one final instruction, not as a command, but as an invitation. "Tonight," he said, "sit again, but do not try to become calm. Simply watch the one who wants calm." That evening, as the protagonist returned home, his mind replayed the question again and again. Are you meditating to escape or to see? When he sat that night, the room felt the same. The cushion felt the same. The thoughts arrived as expected. But now, instead of fighting them, he noticed the urge to fight. He saw the reaching. He saw the resistance. He saw the fear beneath both. For the first time, meditation did not feel like a task. It felt like a mirror, and though the reflection was not always pleasant, it was unmistakably honest. The escape he had been seeking began to lose its appeal, because something deeper was emerging, something quieter than silence itself. the beginning of clear seeing. That night, he sat down with a hesitation he had not felt before. Not the hesitation of failure, nor the restless urgency that usually accompanied his practice, but something quieter, an uncertainty born of honesty. The teacher's words still echoed in him, not as instructions to follow, but as questions that refused to be ignored. Do not try to become calm. Simply watch the one who wants calm. He placed the cushion on the floor, as usual. The room was dim, the air still. Nothing about the setting had changed. And yet, everything felt different. He sat. At first, habit took over. His back straightened automatically. His hands rested in his lap. His eyes closed. For a moment, he waited, waiting for something to happen, for some subtle shift that would signal he was doing it right. Nothing happened. Almost immediately, discomfort appeared. A dull ache formed in his lower back. His knees protested against the unfamiliar stillness. A tightness crept into his shoulders, as if they were bracing for an unseen impact. His breath felt shallow, constrained, unwilling to settle into any rhythm. The urge to move surged strongly. Usually, this was the point where he adjusted his posture, shifted his legs, searched for a position that would make the discomfort disappear. Tonight, however, he remembered the teacher's voice, not as sound, but as presence. Aim for honesty. So he stayed. He did not force himself into immobility, but he also did not rush to escape the sensation. He simply noticed it. The ache in his back was not a single solid thing. When he looked closely, it pulsed subtly, changing in intensity from moment to moment. The tightness in his shoulders was not constant either. It expanded and contracted, responding to the flow of his breath. This surprised him. Discomfort, he realized, was not as fixed as he had believed. It was alive, moving, responsive. What made it unbearable was not its presence, but his resistance to it. His mind, however, was less cooperative. Thoughts erupted quickly, forming a familiar chorus. This is pointless. You're wasting time. You should adjust your posture. This is not how meditation is supposed to feel. Normally, these thoughts would have pulled him completely away from the present moment. Tonight, he noticed them as events, sounds in the mind rather than commands. He did not argue with them. He did not follow them. He simply acknowledged them. A strange thing happened when he did this. The thoughts did not disappear, but they lost some of their authority. They became less like orders and more like commentary, background noise rather than the main event. He brought his attention gently to the breath, not to control it, not to improve it, just to notice it. The breath felt uneven, slightly strained. He noticed the subtle pause at the end of each exhale, the brief moment of stillness before the next inhale arrived on its own. He had never paid attention to that pause before. It felt fragile. As his awareness rested there, another layer of discomfort surfaced, not physical this time, but emotional. A quiet unease emerged, difficult to name. It was not anxiety exactly, nor sadness, but something beneath both, a subtle fear of being present without distraction. The feeling was intimate, almost vulnerable. He realized how rarely he allowed himself to simply be. Silence, when not filled with distraction, exposed something raw. The instinct to escape returned with force. His body tensed. His jaw clenched slightly. The thought arose, I don't like this. Instead of pushing it away, he noticed that too. Disliking is here. The recognition was subtle, but it created a small space, a gap between the experience and his reaction to it. Within that gap, something unexpected appeared, curiosity. What exactly was this discomfort? He looked more closely. The emotional unease did not have a clear shape. It manifested as a tightening in the chest, a slight heaviness behind the eyes, a restless energy in the limbs. It shifted constantly, never settling long enough to be grasped. He realized he had spent years trying to outrun this feeling, labeling it as something wrong, something to be eliminated. Yet here it was, changing moment by moment, responding to attention like a living thing. He stayed with it. Minutes passed. He did not know how many. Time felt different now, less rigid, less demanding. The discomfort rose and fell in waves. Sometimes it intensified, sometimes it softened. At no point did it overwhelm him completely. This too surprised him. He had believed that if he truly faced his discomfort, it would consume him. Instead, he found that awareness provided a kind of quiet containment. The sensations could move freely without taking him with them. At one point, a sharp pain shot through his knee. Instinctively, his body leaned forward, ready to adjust. He paused. He asked himself, not intellectually, but gently, is this pain unbearable or merely unpleasant? He observed it carefully. The pain was intense, yes, but it was localized. It did not spread endlessly as fear suggested. It had edges. It pulsed, fluctuated, changed. When he softened his resistance, it softened too, if only slightly. Eventually, he adjusted his posture, not as an act of escape, but as an act of care. The movement was slow, conscious, deliberate. He noticed the difference immediately. Movement done with awareness did not break meditation. It deepened it. As the session continued, waves of discomfort continued to arise. Physical aches, restless thoughts, emotional undercurrents. Each time, he met them with the same quiet attention, the same willingness to stay without demanding change. A realization dawned slowly, not as a dramatic insight, but as a gentle recognition. Discomfort was not the enemy of meditation. Avoidance was. Meditation was not asking him to become numb or detached. It was asking him to become intimate with his experience, to feel fully, without adding layers of fear and judgment. This intimacy felt unfamiliar, almost radical. At one point, a memory surfaced unexpectedly, an old regret he had not thought about in years. His chest tightened again, sharper this time. The urge to escape surged violently. He noticed the impulse. Escaping is here. He did not suppress the memory. He did not analyze it. He allowed it to exist alongside the breath, alongside the sensations in the body. The memory, deprived of resistance, gradually lost its intensity. It faded on its own. When the session ended, he did not feel calm in the way he once expected meditation to deliver. His mind was still active. His body still carried traces of tension. And yet, something fundamental had shifted. He felt grounded, not because discomfort had disappeared, but because he had discovered that he could remain present with it. He had not broken. He had not drowned. He had stayed. As he opened his eyes, the room looked the same. The walls, the floor, the dim light, unchanged. But his relationship to the moment had altered subtly, irrevocably. Discomfort was no longer a signal to flee. It was a doorway. That night, as he lay in bed, the familiar weight returned, but it felt different now. Less oppressive, more transparent. He could sense its movement, its impermanence. For the first time, he understood something the teacher had not needed to explain in words. Meditation was not about finding a place where discomfort did not exist. It was about discovering the stillness that could hold it. And in that discovery, the path ahead, though still uncertain, felt unmistakably real. The next morning, he woke with a strange familiarity in his chest. Not the old heaviness exactly, but something quieter, more spacious. The discomfort was still there, yet it no longer felt like an intruder. It felt known. As he moved through the early hours of the day, fragments of the previous night's sitting returned to him, not as memories to analyze, but as sensations remembered in the body. The ache that had pulsed and softened, the emotions that had risen and faded, the realization that staying was possible. Yet one thing still troubled him. Thoughts. They had not stopped. If anything, they had seemed more vivid, more noticeable. And a part of him still carried the old belief, quiet but persistent, that thoughts were the problem. That evening, he sat again. He placed the cushion on the floor, not ceremoniously, but with a simple attentiveness. He settled in a posture and allowed the body to find its own balance. The breath moved naturally, without instruction. Almost immediately, thoughts appeared. Plans for tomorrow. A memory from years ago. A half-formed sentence with no clear beginning or end. His first instinct was familiar, to redirect attention back to the breath, to pull away from the thinking. He caught himself mid-effort. What if I don't push this away? The question arose gently, without force. He remembered the teacher's words, aim for honesty. So instead of returning immediately to the breath, he stayed with the thought itself, not the content, but the experience of thinking. The thought felt like a movement, not an object. It rose quickly, hovered briefly, and dissolved without ceremony. Another followed, then another, each one different in content, yet identical in nature, appearing, shifting, disappearing. He had never noticed this before. Previously, thoughts had seemed solid, convincing, urgent. They had felt like truths demanding response. Now, observed closely, they revealed themselves as fleeting events, no more permanent than sensations in the body. Still, resistance lingered. A thought arose, you're getting distracted. He noticed it. Another followed, you should focus better. He noticed that too. Then something subtle happened. He saw that these were just thoughts commenting on thoughts. Layers of mental narration stacked upon one another. None of them required obedience. A quiet clarity emerged. Thoughts were not enemies. They were movements of the mind, arising according to conditions, just like breath and sensation. Fighting them was like fighting waves in the ocean, exhausting and unnecessary. He returned gently to the breath, not as an escape, but as an anchor. The breath did not suppress thinking. It simply offered a place to rest attention when the mind wandered. Soon it wandered again. This time, instead of frustration, there was curiosity. Where do thoughts come from? He did not try to answer intellectually. He watched. A thought appeared fully formed, as if from nowhere. There was no warning, no effort. It simply arose. Another followed, triggered by the first. Then a pause. In that pause, he sensed something deeper, a vast quiet not dependent on the absence of thoughts, but present beneath them. Thoughts floated through this quiet like clouds passing through an open sky. The sky was not disturbed by the clouds. This image surfaced naturally, not as a concept borrowed from a book, but as a direct experience. He felt it rather than understood it. The realization was gentle, but profound. Awareness was larger than thought. Thoughts did not define the space they appeared in. They were guests, not owners. As this understanding settled, something in him softened. The constant vigilance, the need to monitor, control, and correct the mind began to loosen. He experimented carefully. When a thought arose, he labeled it silently, without judgment. Thinking, then he returned to the breath. Sometimes the labeling felt artificial. Sometimes it helped. He noticed that even the desire to label could become another thought. He smiled faintly at the irony. There was no perfect method, and that too felt like relief. During one sitting, a particularly persistent thought appeared, a worry about a decision he had been avoiding. Normally, this thought would have pulled him into a spiral of analysis and self-criticism. This time he stayed. He noticed the physical response first, a tightening in the stomach, a subtle contraction in the chest. The thought and the sensation were intertwined, feeding each other. Instead of resolving the problem mentally, he allowed the sensations to be felt fully. He allowed the thought to exist without answering it. Slowly, the intensity diminished. The thought did not vanish because it was solved. It faded because it was no longer being fed. This observation unsettled and freed him at the same time. How much of his suffering, he wondered, was sustained not by circumstances, but by repeated engagement with thoughts that did not require engagement. He was not trying to suppress thinking now. He was learning to see it clearly. As days passed, this practice deepened. Thoughts continued to arise, some pleasant, some painful, some mundane. The difference was his relationship to them. He no longer greeted them as intruders. He greeted them as weather. Some days were stormy. Some were calm. None were permanent. During one sitting, frustration returned unexpectedly. His mind felt scattered, restless, unwilling to settle, even briefly. Old judgments resurfaced. You're regressing. This should be easier by now. He noticed the familiar tightening, the urge to fix, to improve. Then, gently, He turned his attention toward the frustration itself. Frustration was a thought accompanied by sensation. Nothing more. He allowed it. The moment he stopped resisting, the frustration softened. It did not disappear immediately, but it lost its sharp edge. He understood, then, that acceptance was not passivity. It was clarity without struggle. Later that week, he encountered the teacher again, briefly, as they passed each other on the path. They exchanged greetings, nothing more. But the man paused, looked at him, and asked casually, "How is your mind?" The protagonist considered the question carefully. "It's still noisy," he replied. The teacher smiled. "And how is your relationship to the noise?" The answer came without hesitation. "It's changing." The teacher nodded, satisfied. That night, as he sat once more, thoughts arose and passed as they always had. But now, beneath them, there was a growing steadiness. Not the stillness of silence, but the stability of understanding. He saw that thoughts were not obstacles to meditation. Believing them unquestioningly was. Fighting them was. Clinging to them was. Meditation was not the absence of thought. It was freedom from being owned by thought. As this truth settled, he felt a quiet gratitude, not toward meditation as a technique, but toward the mind itself. The mind was not betraying him. It was revealing itself. And in that revelation, something essential was unfolding. He was learning to listen without being lost, to see without being captured, to think without being imprisoned. The mind, once an adversary, was slowly becoming teacher. Not because it had changed, but because he had. There came a morning when he noticed a pause. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable once seen. He was standing at the kitchen sink, waiting for water to boil, when a familiar thought began to rise. It was the kind that usually carried him away without permission, pulling him in a quiet commentary about what should have been different, what might go wrong next. But this time, something interrupted the pattern. Between the first stirrings of the thought and his usual reaction to it, there was space. Not silence. Space. He stood there, aware of the warmth of the cup in his hands, the faint hum of the stove, the movement of breath in his chest. The thought still existed, but it no longer filled the entire field of experience. It floated within something larger. He did not push it away. He did not follow it. He simply saw it. The thought dissolved naturally, like mist thinning under morning light. He remained standing, slightly surprised, not at the disappearance of the thought, but at the quiet ease with which it had come and gone. Later that day, when he sat to meditate, this memory returned to him, not as something to replicate, but as a reminder of what had already been revealed. He took his seat without expectation. The body settled slowly. The breath moved on its own. Sounds entered awareness. The distant traffic, the occasional creak of the building, a bird calling from somewhere unseen. Thoughts arose, as always. Yet something fundamental had shifted in how they were held. He remembered the teacher's words about awareness being like a mirror, reflecting everything without preference, without judgment. At the time, the metaphor had seemed poetic but abstract. Now, sitting quietly, he began to understand it directly. A mirror does not chase images. It does not resist them. It does not cling to them once they pass. It simply reflects. He allowed awareness to function this way, not as a tool he used, but as a natural quality already present. When a thought appeared, awareness reflected it. When a sensation arose, awareness reflected it. When emotion surfaced, awareness reflected it too. Nothing was excluded. Nothing was prioritized. This inclusiveness felt radical. Previously, meditation had felt like a narrow focus, a constant effort to return attention to a single object, correcting deviation after deviation. Now it felt expansive. The breath was still there, but it was no longer a gatekeeper. It was simply one experience among many, appearing in awareness. At one point, a memory surfaced unexpectedly, a moment from years ago that carried unresolved shame. His chest tightened, and the familiar urge to escape surged quickly. This time, he did not recoil. He noticed the tightening. He noticed the heat in his face. He noticed the story the mind began to construct around the memory. All of it appeared in awareness, clear and vivid. Yet something remarkable happened. The awareness itself did not contract. The emotions surged, but the space that held them remained open. For the first time, he understood that awareness was not something he created through effort. It was already present, already stable, already untouched by what passed through it. The experience was not dramatic. There was no sudden peace, no burst of joy. There was simply clarity, and clarity felt deeply trustworthy. He realized how often he had mistaken awareness for attention. Attention was narrow, selective, easily fatigued. Awareness was wide, effortless, and resilient. Meditation, he now saw, was not about tightening attention until the mind behaved. It was about resting in awareness and allowing experience to reveal itself. This realization changed everything. When thoughts became loud, awareness remained. When sensations intensified, awareness remained. When emotions fluctuated, awareness remained. Nothing needed to be fixed for awareness to be present. The sense of self he had always assumed to be solid, the one who struggled, judged, and tried so hard to improve, began to soften at the edges. It was still there, but it was no longer the center. He noticed that this self was itself an object in awareness, a collection of thoughts, sensations, and habits appearing and disappearing like everything else. This insight arrived quietly, without fanfare, and yet it was profound. He had spent his life believing he was inside the storm. Now he saw that he was the sky. The storm still came and went. Rain still fell. Thunder still rolled. But the sky was never harmed by it. He sat with this understanding, not trying to hold on to it. He knew from experience that clinging to insight only turned it into another object of desire. So he let it be. As the session continued, he noticed how easily awareness included even subtle preferences, the desire for pleasant sensations, the aversion to discomfort. These two were seen clearly, without condemnation. Awareness did not need to be purified. It was already pure by nature. Later, while walking through the park, he tested this understanding gently. He walked without rushing, feeling each step, each shift of weight. Thoughts arose about errands, about conversations, about the future. They came and went. The sounds of the city blended with the rustle of leaves. A breeze touched his skin. The world appeared vividly, without effort. He felt present, not as someone concentrating intensely, but as someone open. At one point, he passed a teacher sitting quietly on a bench. They exchanged a nod. No words were spoken. None were needed. That evening, during his final sitting of the day, he reflected briefly on how far his understanding had shifted. Not in time, weeks or days mattered little, but in orientation. He no longer sat to escape discomfort. He no longer sat to silence thought. He sat to see, and what he saw was not chaos, but movement. Not enemies, but appearances. Not a broken mind, but a misunderstood one. As the session ended, a quiet gratitude arose, not directed at any particular outcome, but toward the simplicity of awareness itself. He realized that awareness was always available, in every moment, under every condition. Nothing needed to be added. Nothing needed to be removed. The mirror was already clear, and in its reflection, life revealed itself, not as something to be escaped, but as something to be known. Pain announced itself quietly that morning. It was not dramatic. There was no sharp event, no obvious cause. It began as a dull pressure in his chest, a subtle heaviness that followed him as he moved through the early hours of the day. He noticed it while brushing his teeth, while tying his shoes, while stepping out into the street. In the past, this sensation would have immediately triggered a familiar chain reaction. Something is wrong. Why does this keep happening? I should be past this by now. But now, something else happened first. He noticed the sensation itself. The tightness was real. It had a location, a texture, a weight. It pulsed gently, rising and falling with the breath. It was uncomfortable, but it was not yet suffering. This distinction surprised him. As he walked, Memories attempted to attach themselves to the sensation. Unfinished conversations, old disappointments, imagined futures where the feeling never left. The mind reached instinctively for explanation, for narrative, for meaning. And then he saw it. The pain was one thing. The story about the pain was another. He slowed his steps and stood still for a moment, letting the realization settle. Cars passed. Voices echoed faintly. Life continued without pause. He closed his eyes briefly, not to escape the world, but to look more closely. The sensation in his chest did not say, "I am failure." It did not say, "I will last forever." It did not say anything at all. It was simply sensation. Warm, dense, moving. The suffering began only when the mind started to speak for it. Later that day, when he sat to meditate, this understanding returned with clarity. He took his seat as he had learned, upright but relaxed, breath natural, awareness open. He did not search for calm. He did not brace for discomfort. He waited. It did not take long. A familiar ache surfaced in his lower back. A tightness followed in the shoulders. Then, like an echo, the emotional heaviness returned to the chest. In earlier days, this would have been the moment he labeled the sitting a bad session. He would have tried to endure it, counting minutes until it ended, mentally rehearsing explanations for why meditation was not working. This time he stayed. He brought awareness directly to the raw sensation. Not to analyze it, not to fix it, just to feel it. The ache in the back was not constant. It shimmered slightly, fluctuating in intensity. The tightness in the shoulders was layered, pressure, warmth, subtle vibration beneath the surface. He noticed something unexpected. The sensations were tolerable. Unpleasant, yes, but tolerable. What had made them overwhelming in the past was not their intensity, but the meaning he assigned to them, the belief that they should not be there, the fear that they signaled something wrong, the assumption that they were permanent. He stayed with the sensations long enough for another layer to reveal itself. Thoughts began to arise around the discomfort. This always happens. You're not strong enough for this. Why can't you just relax? Instead of engaging with these thoughts, he observed them as sounds, internal murmurs passing through awareness. They appeared and disappeared like everything else. He noticed how each thought, when believed, tightened the body further, and how each thought, when simply seen, lost its grip. The pain remained, but the suffering softened. Minutes passed. He did not track them. Time had become secondary. At some point, a sharp surge of sensation moved through his knee, more intense than before. The body reacted immediately. A spike of resistance, a tightening of muscles, an urge to shift. He paused. He remembered the teacher's earlier words, not as a quote, but as lived understanding. See clearly. He looked closely at the knee. The sensation was strong, but it was localized. It did not fill the entire body. It did not dominate awareness unless he allowed it to. He noticed how the mind tried to expand the pain, turning it into a prediction. This will get worse. You won't be able to sit. You'll have to stop. These are not sensations. They were stories. He returned attention gently to the raw experience. The sensation pulsed. It peaked. Then, slowly it shifted. It did not disappear, but it changed. This was the moment the insight deepened beyond understanding into knowing. Pain was dynamic. Suffering was static. Pain moved when met with awareness. Suffering solidified when wrapped in story. He stayed with this realization, letting it sink into the body, not the intellect. The sitting continued, not effortlessly but honestly. Another memory arose, one he had avoided for years. It came with a familiar sting, a tightening behind the eyes, a heat in the chest. This time, he did not ask why it had appeared. He noticed the physical sensations accompanying the memory. He noticed the urge to explain it, to justify it, to replay it. He let the memory be present without feeding it. Without resistance, the emotional charge softened. The memory remained, but its power diminished. It was no longer a verdict. It was an appearance. As the sitting came to a close, he felt tired, but not defeated. The body still carried discomfort. The mind still produced thoughts. Nothing had been transcended, and yet something fundamental had changed. He had seen suffering clearly, not as an enemy, not as a personal failure, but as a process. That evening, as he moved through daily tasks, this clarity stayed with him. When irritation arose, he noticed the heat in the body before the words in the mind. When sadness appeared, he felt its weight without immediately naming it. Each time, the same pattern revealed itself. Sensation first, story second, suffering only when the two fused. He understood now why the teaching spoke of liberation not as the removal of pain, but as freedom from attachment to it. Pain was part of being alive. Resistance was optional. Later, lying in bed, he felt the familiar heaviness return once more. It rested in the chest like an old companion. He did not welcome it. He did not reject it. He felt it. Without commentary, without conclusion. The sensation shifted slowly, subtly, and in that movement, he sensed something quietly revolutionary. When pain is seen without a story, it is no longer a prison. It is simply a moment, passing. It revealed itself in the smallest of ways, not through grand insight or sudden revelation, but through repetition, quiet, persistent, undeniable. He noticed it one morning while watching steam rise from his cup of tea. The warmth reached his hands, lingered briefly, and then faded. The steam curled upward, visible for a moment before dissolving into the air. Nothing stayed. He had seen this countless times before. Yet that morning it struck him differently, not as an observation, but as a truth felt in the body. Everything was moving. Later, during his sitting practice, this recognition deepened. He settled in his stillness with the familiarity that now came naturally. No expectation of calm, no resistance to discomfort. Awareness opened effortlessly, holding breath, sensation, sound, and thought alike. The breath became his first teacher. He noticed how no inhale was ever identical to the last. Some were shallow, others deeper. Some arrived smoothly, others hesitated slightly, as if unsure of themselves. The exhale followed its own rhythm, sometimes long, sometimes short. He had once tried to control this rhythm. Now he simply watched. Each breath was born, lived briefly, and dissolved. Nothing could be held. This was impermanence, not as an idea, but as a direct experience unfolding in every moment. As he stayed with the breath, sensations in the body mirrored the same truth. A dull ache in the back intensified, softened, and shifted location. A subtle tingling in the hands appeared unexpectedly, then faded. Even the sense of pressure where his body met the cushion changed constantly. He realized how deeply he had believed discomfort was static. It was not. It was movement misunderstood. Thoughts followed the same pattern. A memory surfaced, vivid and emotionally charged. Moments later, it was replaced by a planning thought about the day ahead. Then came a fragment of song. Then nothing at all. The mind never stopped moving. Yet within this movement, there was order. Nothing stayed long enough to define him. This recognition brought an unexpected sense of ease. He remembered how he used to cling, to pleasant moments, to feelings of clarity, to fleeting experiences of peace. Each time, the clinging had produced disappointment, because what he tried to hold inevitably slipped away. Now he saw why. Impermanence was not a flaw in experience. It was its nature. As this understanding settled, another insight emerged quietly, almost shyly. If everything changes, then suffering must change too. He had once believed suffering was something solid, an identity, a condition, a personal flaw. Sitting there, watching sensation and thought arise and fade, he could no longer maintain that belief. Suffering was a pattern, not a thing. It arose under certain conditions. And when those conditions shifted, suffering shifted too. This did not mean suffering would never return. It meant it was never permanent. The relief this brought was subtle, but deep. He stayed with the unfolding experience, letting impermanence teach without interference. When a pleasant sensation appeared, a moment of warmth, a sense of lightness, he noticed the mind's reflex to grasp. This is it. This is what meditation should feel like. He smiled inwardly. He did not hold it. The sensation passed, as it always did. Yet something remarkable happened when he did not cling. The passing did not feel like loss. It felt natural. The same was true when unpleasant sensations arose. Instead of bracing against them, he observed their movement. Even sharp discomfort revealed itself as a series of pulses rather than a single, unchanging block. This observation dismantled fear. Fear thrived on the belief that pain would remain unchanged. Seeing impermanence dissolved that belief. Later that day, as he walked through the city, this awareness extended beyond formal practice. He watched shadows shift along buildings as the sun moved. He noticed how sounds appeared and vanished. A passing car, a snippet of conversation, footsteps echoing briefly before fading. Even emotions followed the same law. A moment of irritation flared when someone cut in front of him, then faded when his attention returned to the rhythm of walking. A wave of gratitude arose unexpectedly when he noticed the sky opening above the street, then softened into neutrality. Nothing stayed. Nothing needed to. That evening, he sat again, this time with a quiet appreciation for the simplicity of it all. He no longer needed meditation to give him something special. It was enough to see what was already true. Impermanence was not something to fear. It was something to trust. As the sitting continued, a deeper layer of understanding unfolded, not as a conclusion, but as a gentle inquiry. If sensations change, if thoughts change, if emotions change, what, if anything, remains? He did not rush to answer. He rested in the question. Awareness itself felt unchanged. Not because it was static, but because it did not come and go in the same way as the content it held. Sensations moved through it. Thoughts appeared and disappeared within it. Awareness remained. This realization did not produce excitement. It produced steadiness. For the first time, he saw clearly that impermanence and stability were not opposites. Change occurred within something that did not change. This insight settled softly without demand. As the session ended, he reflected briefly on how differently he now related to his experience. Life no longer felt like a problem to be solved, but a process to be witnessed. He no longer clung to pleasant moments. He no longer panicked at unpleasant ones. He trusted the movement. Later, lying in bed, he felt the familiar heaviness return. Lighter now, but still present. He did not label it as regression. He did not demand it disappear. He felt it rise. He felt it fall. And as sleep approached, one final understanding emerged, simple and undeniable. Nothing lasts forever. Not pain, not pleasure, not even the idea of self. And in that truth, far from despair, he found a quiet freedom. Because if nothing can be held, then nothing needs to be feared. The insight came not in stillness, but in movement. He was standing in line at a small cafe when it appeared, quiet, precise, unmistakable. The line was long. The air felt warm. A faint irritation stirred in his chest, familiar and automatic. This is taking too long. The thought arose before he noticed it. Then came another. If they were more efficient, I wouldn't feel like this. In the past, this would have been the end of the story. The irritation would have hardened into frustration, then into judgment of the cafe, of the people ahead of him, of the moment itself. But now, something different happened. He saw the craving. Not craving for coffee. Craving for the moment to be different than it was. The recognition stopped him. He felt it clearly, a subtle leaning forward in the body, a tightening in the jaw, a restless energy pushing against the present. It was not anger. It was not impatience. It was wanting the line to be shorter, wanting the discomfort to end, wanting the future to arrive sooner than it naturally would. Craving had always felt like desire for pleasure. Now he saw it more accurately. Craving was resistance disguised as hope. Later that day, during his sitting practice, this realization returned with force. He sat down without ceremony, letting the body settle naturally. The breath flowed easily. Awareness opened wide. Almost immediately, discomfort appeared, a dull ache in the back, a slight tightness in the chest. And with it came the familiar mental movement. This will pass soon. Just sit through it. Eventually, it will feel better. These thoughts seemed harmless at first, encouraging even. But as he watched closely, he saw what they carried beneath them. Craving, not just for relief, but for a future moment where the present would no longer be required. The discomfort itself was manageable. The craving to escape, it was not. He stayed with the sensations, allowing them to unfold without anticipation. The ache shifted. The tightness softened slightly. Then it returned. The mind reacted instantly. Why is this still here? He noticed the question not as inquiry, but as resistance. This was the pattern he had never seen clearly before. Sensation arose. Then craving arose, subtle, insistent, restless. And suffering followed, not because of the sensation, but because of the craving. The realization deepened as he continued sitting. Each time a pleasant sensation appeared, a moment of lightness, a sense of ease, the same pattern emerged. Hold this. Don't lose it. This is what meditation should be like. Craving again. Even pleasure was not free from it. He saw now why moments of peace had always felt fragile. They were built on grasping, and grasping carried the fear of loss. This understanding was sobering. Craving was not limited to obvious desire. It lived in hope, in preference, in subtle expectations. It lived in the belief that freedom existed somewhere other than here. As the sitting continued, a deeper layer of craving revealed itself, the desire to be free from craving. He smiled softly at the irony. The mind had found yet another place to run. He did not try to eliminate this craving. He watched it. Craving felt like tension, like leaning forward internally, like the body bracing against the moment. He noticed how it contracted awareness, narrowing attention to a single imagined outcome. Without feeding it, the craving softened, not because it was defeated, but because it was seen. He remembered the teachings he had once read, but never understood, about the Four Noble Truths, about suffering arising from craving. They had sounded philosophical, distant. Now they were immediate. Suffering was not caused by pain. It was caused by wanting the pain to end. Suffering was not caused by impermanence. It was caused by wanting permanence. This insight did not bring elation. It brought honesty. He stayed with the experience until the session ended, noticing how craving rose and fell like everything else. Even craving was impermanent. Later that evening, this clarity followed him into daily life. When hunger arose, he noticed not just the physical sensation, but the mental urgency attached to it. When tiredness appeared, he noticed the resistance to it. In conversation, he noticed how quickly craving for approval arose. A subtle desire to be understood, to be seen as competent, to be liked. Each craving tightened the body. Each moment of seeing loosened it. He did not judge himself for these patterns. They were universal. They were human. That night, while lying in bed, he felt the familiar heaviness return once more. It rested quietly in the chest, neither sharp nor overwhelming. The old impulse arose instinctively. I wish this would go away. He noticed it. The wish was craving. He stayed with the sensation without pursuing the wish. The heaviness remained, then shifted slightly, then softened. Not because it was forced to change, but because the resistance had been released. In that quiet moment, the final insight of the day settled deeply. Craving was the true escape. It was the mind's attempt to flee the present, even when sitting still. Meditation was not about escaping craving. It was about seeing it clearly. And in seeing it clearly, something remarkable happened. The present moment, once treated as an obstacle, revealed itself as sufficient. Not perfect, not painless, but workable, complete. As sleep approached, he understood something he had never understood before. Freedom did not come from getting what he wanted. It came from no longer needing the moment to be different. And in that understanding, the mind finally rested, not because craving had vanished, but because it had been seen for what it was. A habit, not a command. Passing. The first thing he noticed was not peace. It was interruption. He had just finished his morning sitting when his phone vibrated on the table beside him. A message appeared, short, abrupt, slightly critical. The words themselves were ordinary, but the reaction they triggered was immediate and familiar. A tightening in the chest, a subtle heat in the face, a rush of thoughts assembling a response before he had even finished reading. In the past, this moment would have unfolded automatically. The irritation would have solidified. A reply would have been typed quickly, edged with defensiveness. The rest of the day would have carried the residue of that exchange. This time, something else happened first. He noticed a reaction, not intellectually. Physically, the sensations were clear, almost precise. The body reacted before the mind could justify it. And because he saw it happening, he did not have to obey it. He put the phone down, not to suppress the emotion, but to allow it to unfold without being acted out. He stood by the window and took one conscious breath, not deep, not forced, just noticed. The tightness in the chest remained, but it no longer dictated behavior. Thoughts continued to arise, offering arguments, explanations, self-defense. He let them pass. By the time he picked up the phone again, the urgency had softened. The response he eventually sent was simple, direct, and free of unnecessary charge. It surprised him, not because it was perfect, but because it was unforced. That morning marked the beginning of something new. Meditation was no longer confined to the cushion. It was stepping into life. As the days passed, he began to notice how often awareness naturally appeared in ordinary moments. While brushing his teeth, he felt the texture of the bristles, the rhythm of the movement. While walking, he noticed the contact of his feet with the ground. These moments were brief, unremarkable, yet they carried a quiet steadiness. He realized that mindfulness did not require special conditions. It required recognition of what was already happening. One afternoon, while waiting at a traffic light, impatience arose. The body leaned forward slightly, ready to move. A familiar tension built. He noticed it. Instead of filling the weight with mental commentary, he felt the weight of his body standing still, the air on his skin, the sound of cars passing in the distance. The light changed. He crossed the street. Nothing dramatic occurred, yet something fundamental had shifted. The moment had been lived, not endured. In conversation, awareness became even more revealing. He noticed how often he listened not to understand, but to respond. How quickly the mind prepared replies, defenses, opinions. One evening, during a discussion that normally would have escalated, he felt the familiar contraction arise, the need to be right, the need to be heard. He paused, not outwardly, inwardly. He felt the contraction fully, without judging it. He let the other person finish, speaking without interruption. The urge to argue softened. The conversation took a different tone, not because he forced it, but because he was no longer reacting from habit. This was not detachment. It was presence. He realized then that mindfulness was not about withdrawing from life. It was about participating more fully without being controlled by unconscious patterns. At work, challenges continued as they always had. Deadlines loomed. Mistakes happened. Criticism arose. The difference was not in the circumstances, but in his response. When stress appeared, he noticed its physical signature, the shallow breath, the tightening shoulders, the racing mind. Instead of being carried away by it, he acknowledged it. Stress is here. That simple recognition created space. Space to breathe. Space to choose. Sometimes he still reacted. Sometimes old habits resurfaced quickly and strongly. But even then, awareness returned sooner. The recovery was faster. The self-judgment was lighter. Meditation was no longer a refuge from life's difficulties. It was a way of meeting them. One evening, as he walked home after a long day, fatigue settled into his body. The old impulse arose to distract himself, to reach for his phone, to escape into noise. He noticed the impulse. He kept walking without acting on it. The fatigue remained, but it was honest. It asked for rest, not avoidance. He listened. Later that night, while preparing dinner, He noticed how easily awareness slipped into simple actions. Cutting vegetables, washing dishes, feeling the warmth of water on his hands. These moments were not elevated or spiritual. They were real, and they were enough. As weeks passed, he began to understand why the teacher had said that true meditation was not confined to stillness. The cushion had taught him how to see. Life was teaching him how to live. Awareness did not make life smooth. It made it clear. One evening, he reflected on this quietly during his sitting practice. Thoughts arose, sensations shifted, emotions passed through. The same awareness that held them on the cushion now held the entire day. He saw clearly that there was no boundary between meditation and life, only varying degrees of attention. When attention was narrow, life felt overwhelming. When awareness was open, life unfolded naturally. As the session ended, he felt neither exalted nor disappointed. He felt grounded. Carrying awareness in a daily life did not mean being mindful every second. It meant returning again and again, gently, without judgment. This returning was not effortful. It was familiar, and in that familiarity, he sensed a quiet truth settling deeper with each passing day. Freedom was not found by stepping away from life. It was found by stepping fully into it, awake, present, and unafraid of what might arise. Meditation had not given him a new life. It had given him a new way of meeting the life he already had. The test arrived quietly, disguised as an ordinary moment. It came in the form of a conversation he had been postponing for weeks. He knew it would not be easy. The topic was sensitive, layered with history and unspoken resentment. In the past, similar conversations had followed a predictable pattern. Voices tightening, defenses rising, words spoken too quickly and regretted too late. As the time approached, he felt the familiar signs emerge. A tightening in the stomach, a subtle pressure behind the eyes. Thoughts rehearsing arguments before the conversation had even begun. The body was preparing for battle. He noticed it, not with alarm, not with judgment, just noticing. This awareness did not make the fear disappear, but it changed how the fear was held. Instead of being swept into it, he stood beside it. When they finally sat across from each other, the room felt heavy with anticipation. The first few sentences were polite, careful. Then, inevitably, tension surfaced. A comment was made, slightly dismissive, slightly sharp. The reaction was immediate. Heat surged in his chest. His jaw tightened. The familiar urge to interrupt, to defend, to assert himself rose sharply. For a fraction of a second, the old habit nearly took over. Then something intervened. He felt his breath, not consciously controlled, simply felt. The inhale arrived. The exhale followed. And in that small pause between stimulus and response, space appeared. He did not suppress the urge to react. He allowed it to be there, but he did not obey it. This was new. The urge to react felt powerful, but it was no longer absolute. He saw it clearly, an energy moving through the body, not a command that had to be followed. When he spoke, his voice surprised him. It was quieter than usual, slower. The words were simpler, less polished, but more honest. "I hear what you're saying," he said, "and I feel tense right now." There was no accusation in the sentence, no defense, just truth. The effect was subtle, but undeniable. The atmosphere in the room shifted. The other person paused, visibly uncertain, perhaps surprised by the lack of resistance. The conversation continued, not smoothly, not perfectly, but differently. Each time a trigger arose, he noticed the bodily response first. Each time, he returned to the breath, not as a technique, but as an anchor to the present. Sometimes he still reacted. Sometimes a sharp word slipped out before awareness could catch it. But even then, something had changed. He noticed it immediately. There was no spiraling into self-judgment, no internal monologue about failure, just recognition. Reaction happened, and then a return. The conversation ended without resolution, but also without damage. There were no slammed doors, no lingering bitterness, just two imperfect people navigating something difficult. Later that night, As he sat quietly, the experience replayed itself, not as rumination, but as observation. He saw clearly now the difference between reaction and response. Reaction was fast, automatic, rooted in fear and habit. It contracted awareness, narrowing the world to a single point of tension. Response, on the other hand, arose from presence. It was slower, more spacious. It did not guarantee pleasant outcomes, but it allowed integrity. This distinction felt vital. In the days that followed, similar moments appeared everywhere. In traffic, when someone cut him off unexpectedly. At work, when a mistake was pointed out publicly. In small interactions, when expectations were not met. Each time, the same pattern emerged. Stimulus, bodily reaction, mental story. Previously, the story would have taken over instantly, dragging him along. Now, awareness stepped in earlier, sometimes just a moment earlier, but that was enough. He began to see that the breath was not just air moving in and out. It was a bridge between what happened and what he did next. When he remembered to pause, even briefly, choice reappeared. This did not mean he always chose wisely, but he chose consciously. One evening, after a long and tiring day, irritation surfaced unexpectedly. He snapped at someone over something trivial. The words left his mouth before awareness could intervene. Silence followed. The old pattern would have taken over next: justification, blame, or inward shame. This time, he felt the sting of the reaction fully. The tightness in the chest, the regret. He did not push it away. He acknowledged it. "I reacted," he said quietly. Not as an excuse, not as a condemnation, just a fact. The acknowledgement softened the moment. A simple apology followed. Not dramatic, not heavy, but sincere. The tension dissolved. This too was new. He was learning that mindfulness did not prevent mistakes. It prevented him from being trapped by them. As his understanding deepened, he noticed something else. Responding instead of reacting required humility. It meant letting go of the need to be right, to win, to protect an image of self. Reaction was rooted in identity. Response was rooted in awareness. The more he rested in awareness, the less urgent the need to defend that identity became. This did not make him passive. It made him honest. One afternoon, while walking through the park, he saw the teacher again, sitting quietly beneath a tree. They exchanged a few words, nothing more. Before parting, the teacher said something simple. When awareness is present, action becomes clean. The words stayed with him. Clean action. Not perfect action. Not flawless action. Clean. Free from unnecessary aggression, fear, and self-deception. That evening, during a sitting practice, he reflected on how far this understanding had reached into his life. Meditation was no longer something he did. It was something that informed how he lived. Responding instead of reacting did not eliminate conflict. It transformed it. Conflict became information rather than threat. A signal to return, to pause, to see more clearly. As he sat, thoughts arose and passed. Sensations shifted. Emotions flickered. Awareness held them all. And within that awareness, a quiet confidence emerged. Not the confidence of control, but the confidence of presence. Whatever arose, he could meet it, not perfectly, but consciously. And that, he realized, was the beginning of true freedom. For a long time, he had believed freedom was something that arrived after life became easier, after the right decision, after the conflict resolved, after the mind finally learned how to stay calm. Freedom, in his imagination, was always waiting on the other side of improved conditions. Yet, as his practice deepened, this belief began to dissolve, not through argument, but through experience. The day that made this clear began badly. He woke late after a restless night. A message arrived before breakfast, carrying news he had hoped not to receive. Plans unraveled. Deadlines shifted. The sense of being behind settled heavily in his body before the day had even begun. The familiar tension returned. The tightening chest, the shallow breath, the sense of urgency pushing him forward. Nothing about the day was ideal. And yet, something remarkable happened. He noticed the tension without collapsing into it. He did not tell himself the day was ruined. He did not demand that his mood improve. He simply acknowledged what was present. Stress is here. Disappointment is here. Resistance is here. The words were not spoken aloud, but felt quietly within awareness. He moved through the morning carrying these states without trying to correct them. While making breakfast, he noticed the clinking of dishes, the warmth of the stove, the slight tremor in his hands. Life continued in ordinary details, even as difficulty lingered. This was new. Previously, unpleasant conditions had dominated his entire experience. Now, they were part of it, but not all of it. As the day unfolded, challenges continued to arise. A conversation went poorly. A task took longer than expected. Fatigue settled deeper into the body. And yet, beneath it all, there was steadiness. Not happiness, steadiness. He realized then that freedom did not mean the absence of difficulty. It meant the absence of entanglement. He could feel tired without becoming defeated. He could feel disappointed without collapsing into self-blame. He could feel stress without being consumed by it. Each experience was allowed to exist within awareness, moving and changing like everything else. During his lunch break, he sat quietly for a few minutes, not to meditate formally, but to check in. The breath was shallow. The mind was busy. The body felt heavy. He noticed it all, and then something subtle but profound became clear. The awareness noticing these conditions was not affected by them. Awareness was not tired. It was not rushed. It was not disappointed. The conditions were real, but they were not the whole story. This recognition brought a gentle sense of relief. He had been waiting for life to become manageable before allowing himself peace. Now he saw that peace was not a reward for improved circumstances. It was the space that held circumstances. That evening, as he sat in meditation, this insight deepened. The body carried discomfort. Thoughts moved quickly. Emotions flickered unpredictably. He did not try to change any of it. He noticed how awareness remained open, stable, and unaffected. Freedom was not something he entered. It was something he recognized. As the sitting continued, a familiar longing surfaced. The desire for conditions to be different, for life to be easier, for clarity to last. He noticed the longing without indulging it. Longing, too, was a condition. It arose. It stayed briefly. It passed. He remembered how much energy he had spent trying to control outcomes, believing that safety lay in predictability. Now he saw that predictability was an illusion. Life moved on its own terms. Freedom, then, could not depend on controlling it. This understanding changed how he related to uncertainty. Uncertainty no longer felt like a threat. It felt like reality. And reality, when met without resistance, was workable. Later that night, he walked through the city streets under dim lights. The world felt alive. Cars passing, voices overlapping, lights flickering in shop windows. Nothing was quiet. Nothing was especially calm. And yet, within him, there was ease. Not because everything was going well, but because nothing needed to be different for awareness to be present. He understood now why the teacher had never promised peace as an emotional state. Peace, as he had imagined it, depended on conditions. It was fragile. Freedom, on the other hand, was robust. It could coexist with pain. It could coexist with uncertainty. It could even coexist with moments of confusion. This did not make life easier. It made it honest. As he prepared for sleep, the familiar heaviness returned faintly, like a memory of an old companion. He did not push it away. He did not interpret it. He felt it. The sensation shifted, softened, and moved on. He smiled quietly, not from satisfaction, but from recognition. Freedom was not something he would arrive at one day. It was already here, not as a permanent state of bliss, but as a capacity to meet whatever arose without being owned by it. Meditation had not removed the conditions of his life. It had revealed the freedom within them. And in that revelation, he sensed a quiet confidence settling deeper into his being. Whatever came next, he could stay. That was enough. The realization did not arrive suddenly. There was no dramatic moment, no surge of emotion, no sense of arrival. It came quietly, almost unnoticed at first, woven into ordinary moments so seamlessly that it felt as though it had always been there. He noticed it one evening while sitting alone in his room. The day had been uneventful, not particularly good, not especially difficult, just a series of small moments unfolding one after another. He had eaten, worked, spoken to people, walked home. Life had moved forward in its usual way. Now he sat, not because he needed to meditate, but because sitting had become natural. The cushion was familiar. The room was still. His body settled easily, no longer bracing for discomfort, no longer anticipating reward. The breath moved gently, unnoticed until noticed. Thoughts arose. A memory, a plan, a fragment of an image with no clear meaning. He watched them without effort, and then, without warning, a subtle question surfaced, not as a thought demanding an answer, but as a quiet recognition. What exactly am I trying to escape from? He did not rush to respond. He stayed with the question. He scanned his experience carefully. There was sensation in the body, some pleasant, some neutral, some mildly uncomfortable. There were thoughts drifting through awareness. There was a faint emotional tone, neither heavy nor light. Nothing felt threatening. Nothing felt urgent. And yet for years, he had lived as though something essential needed to be avoided. Avoiding pain, avoiding uncertainty, avoiding silence, avoiding himself. Now, sitting quietly, he could not find the enemy he had been running from. Discomfort appeared. He felt it clearly. It moved. Thoughts appeared. He saw them clearly. They passed. Even fear, when it arose, revealed itself as sensation and thought. Nothing solid, nothing permanent. The urge to escape had lost its object. He realized, then, that most of his suffering had not come from what he experienced, but from the belief that experience was unbearable. That belief had shaped his entire life. He had rushed through moments, filled silence with noise, avoided stillness, chased distraction. Even meditation, in the beginning, had been another attempt to flee, to replace one experience with a more acceptable one. Now, that impulse felt strangely unnecessary. There was nothing here that could not be met. This recognition did not make life suddenly easy. It made it simple. He saw clearly that escape had always been a misunderstanding. There was no separate place to arrive at where life stopped being life. No condition in which uncertainty vanished forever. Running had never led to freedom. Seeing had. As he sat, the body shifted slightly. A familiar ache appeared in the knee, faint but noticeable. The old impulse to adjust arose instinctively. He noticed it. He stayed. The sensation pulsed gently, then softened. Not because he endured it heroically, but because he no longer believed it was a problem. This was the difference. Earlier in his journey, staying had required effort. It had felt like courage, like discipline, like patience. Now, staying felt obvious. Where else would he go? Every attempt to escape would only lead to another experience, another sensation, another thought, another moment. There was no outside. This insight settled deeply, not as philosophy, but as lived truth. He remembered the teacher's first question: are you meditating to escape or to see? Now he understood the answer, not in words, but in being. Meditation was seeing. Seeing revealed there was nothing to escape from. Life was not an obstacle. It was the path itself. As the sitting continued, he noticed something else quietly dissolving: the sense of effort. He was no longer trying to be aware. Awareness was simply there, open and effortless, holding everything without preference. The sense of a separate observer softened. Experience unfolded without commentary. Breath moved. Sound arose. Sensation shifted. Thoughts appeared and faded. All of it happened naturally, without interference. This was not emptiness in the dramatic sense. It was fullness without grasping. He felt a quiet tenderness toward his past self, the one who had struggled so hard, who had searched desperately for peace, who had believed something was fundamentally wrong. Nothing had been wrong, only misunderstood. Later that night, as he prepared for sleep, he noticed how the mind no longer rushed toward distraction. Silence did not feel dangerous. Stillness did not feel empty. Lying in the darkness, thoughts drifted through awareness like distant echoes. He did not follow them. He did not push them away. They passed. The body relaxed naturally, not because it was commanded to, but because there was no longer a need to remain guarded. He realized then that safety had never come from control. It had come from openness, from the willingness to feel, from the recognition that whatever arose could be met. Nothing to run from, nothing to hide from, nothing to fix before being present. This understanding did not make him special. It made him human, fully, honestly human. As sleep approached, one final clarity settled gently into awareness. The search for freedom ends when there is nowhere left to escape. And in that ending, life begins to be lived, not as a problem to solve, but as a reality to embrace. Just as it is. He used to believe stillness belonged to quiet places. A meditation hall, a forest path, a room with closed doors and minimal sound. Movement, in his mind, was the opposite: busy, distracting, incompatible with clarity. Now, that belief felt distant, almost naive. He noticed a shift one morning while walking through a crowded street. People hurried past him in every direction. Vehicles moved noisily. Conversations overlapped, forming a constant hum of sound. Nothing about the scene was calm. And yet, within him, there was stillness. Not the stillness of absence, but the stillness of presence. His body moved naturally with the flow of the crowd. His feet touched the ground rhythmically. His breath adjusted without effort. Awareness remained open, unshaken by the activity around him. This was new. Previously, such environments would have overwhelmed him. Noise would have pulled him outward. Thoughts would have multiplied. Tension would have built unnoticed until it demanded release. Now, movement did not disturb awareness. It expressed it. He realized then that stillness was not the absence of motion. It was the absence of inner resistance. As he continued walking, thoughts arose as they always had. Plans, memories, impressions. They passed through awareness without pulling him away. The world moved. He moved. Awareness remained. This understanding deepened throughout the day. While working, he noticed how attention shifted between tasks. When fully present, the work flowed easily. When distracted, effort increased. He did not force focus. He simply returned when he noticed he had wandered. Return had become gentle, unforced. In the past, he had treated distraction as failure. Now it was information, a reminder to come back. Even in moments of intensity, stillness was available. During a difficult meeting, when opinions clashed and voices rose, he felt the familiar contraction arise in his chest. He noticed it. He stayed. The contraction softened on its own. He spoke when it was time to speak. He listened when it was time to listen. Stillness was not passive. It was responsive. Later, while preparing a meal, he felt the simple rhythm of movement, cutting, stirring, washing. Each action flowed into the next without hurry. Sounds, textures, and smells filled awareness. Nothing was added. Nothing was removed. Life unfolded as it was. He saw now why the teacher had emphasized walking meditation, everyday awareness, ordinary actions. Stillness was not something to be protected from life. It was something to be discovered within it. That evening, he sat briefly, not because he needed to, but because it felt natural. The body settled. The breath flowed. Awareness opened. Movement continued within stillness. Sensations shifting, thoughts appearing, emotions flickering. Nothing stood still. And yet, there was no agitation. He understood now that stillness was not a frozen state. It was a relationship with experience that did not resist change. He reflected on how much effort he had once spent trying to create ideal conditions for meditation. Silence, comfort, uninterrupted time. Those conditions had been helpful at first, but they were never the essence. The essence was awareness, and awareness was always moving. As the sitting ended, he stood and stretched. The body moved fluidly, unguarded. There was no sense of leaving meditation behind. Meditation moved with him. Later, walking home under the evening sky, he noticed how naturally awareness accompanied each step. Thoughts about the day appeared, then faded. Sensations in the body shifted with movement. The world was alive. So was he. And in that aliveness, there was peace, not as something separate, but as the absence of conflict. He realized, then, that stillness was not something to hold on to. It was something that revealed itself whenever he stopped pushing against life. That night, as he lay down to sleep, he noticed the familiar sensations of fatigue settling in. He did not try to prolong awareness or maintain a particular state. He let go. Stillness remained, not because he held it, but because it was never dependent on holding. The last thought before sleep was not a thought at all, but a quiet knowing. There is no place where meditation ends. There is no place where life begins. Movement and stillness are not opposites. They're the same truth, seen from different angles. And in that truth, he rested, fully present, fully alive, and completely at home. The ending did not feel like an ending. There was no closing scene, no final declaration, no sense of completion that separated what came before from what came after. Life continued in the same way it always had. Days unfolding into nights, moments replacing moments, breath following breath. And yet, something essential had resolved itself. He noticed it most clearly one early morning, just before sunrise. The room was dim, washed in the soft gray light that arrives before the day fully begins. He sat on the edge of his bed, not intending to meditate, not intending to reflect. He was simply awake. The mind was quiet, but not empty. Thoughts moved slowly, like distant clouds. Sensations in the body were gentle, neutral. There was nothing he needed to do, nowhere he needed to go, nothing he needed to become. And in that ordinariness, the truth revealed itself. Meditation had never been about changing his experience. It had been about seeing it clearly. This clarity did not arrive as an idea. It arrived as a way of being. He could feel it in how the body rested without tension, in how thoughts passed without pulling him into their current, in how emotions moved without demanding resolution. Nothing was being fixed. Nothing was being avoided. This was the quiet truth. For a long time, he had imagined awakening as something extraordinary, an experience that would elevate him beyond ordinary life, beyond confusion, beyond pain. Now he saw how misleading that image had been. Awakening was not an escape from humanity. It was intimacy with it. He remembered his earliest attempts at meditation, the frustration, the restlessness, the desire for silence. He remembered how desperately he had wanted relief, how strongly he had believed peace lived somewhere else, waiting to be reached. Now he could see the simplicity of the misunderstanding. He had been looking away from what was already here. The mind had not been an obstacle. The world had not been a problem. The present moment had never been lacking. The only thing that had obscured this truth was the habit of resistance, the constant attempt to replace reality with preference. That habit had softened, not through force, but through understanding. He stood and walked quietly to the window. Outside, the city was beginning to stir. Lights flickered on. A bird called from somewhere unseen. A car passed in the distance. Nothing about the scene was sacred, and yet everything felt complete. He noticed how awareness naturally included it all. The sound, the movement, the subtle emotions arising in the body. There was no separation between the observer and the observed. No need to label. No need to conclude. This, he realized, was what the teachings had been pointing to all along. Not a state to achieve, but a clarity to recognize. Later that day, life unfolded with its usual unpredictability. Small annoyances arose. Moments of pleasure appeared and disappeared. Fatigue visited. So did ease. None of it felt threatening. None of it felt like proof of progress or failure. It was simply life moving. In conversation, he listened without preparing responses in advance. When words came, they came naturally. When silence arrived, it was allowed. In moments of difficulty, awareness remained. The body reacted, emotion stirred, thoughts appeared, but none of them demanded identification. He was no longer asking, How do I get rid of this? He was asking, can this be met? And the answer, again and again, was yes. That evening, he sat one last time, not as a ritual, not as an obligation, but as a gesture of appreciation. He did not set a timer. He did not adopt a special posture. He simply sat. Awareness opened effortlessly. Thoughts arose, faded. Sensations shifted, dissolved. Emotions flickered past. All of it was held within something vast, silent, and utterly ordinary. He did not cling to this openness. He did not try to name it. He knew that naming would only turn it into something to grasp. Instead, he rested, not in a trance, not in withdrawal, but in simple presence. He understood now why the teacher had never offered elaborate techniques or dramatic promises. The truth was too simple to be packaged, too close to be pointed at directly. Meditation had not been a way out. It had been a way in, into the body, into sensation, into thought, into emotion, into life as it is. And in entering fully, without resistance, something remarkable had been revealed. There was nothing missing, nothing broken, nothing that needed to be transcended before peace was possible. Peace was not a destination. It was the absence of war with the present moment. As he stood up and moved through the room, stillness moved with him, not as a state to maintain, but as a natural quality of awareness. He smiled softly, not in triumph, but in recognition. The search was over, not because he had found what he was looking for, but because he had discovered that what he was looking from was the very place he needed to stand. The quiet truth did not promise a life without pain. It promised a life without unnecessary suffering. It did not offer certainty. It offered clarity. And clarity, he now knew, was enough. Life continued. Breath continued. Awareness remained. Nothing more was required. Nothing less would do. And in that simplicity, the story ended. Not with an answer, but with a living question met fully in each unfolding moment.